but I don't think I've been checking through the list. I don't think he's on. So what I'm going to do is just jump ahead to Pops if he's able to share. Are you there?
I'm here, brother. And if Glenn, if you would stop screen sharing, I got something that I'd like to share.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Oh, man, and I have to say, it's an honor to follow you, brother. I have listened to your stuff since day one when I started this journey. Man, oh, man. Oh, and that being said, I want to go to this right here. I want to, because of everybody that has been sharing their stories tonight, it just keeps reminding me over and over of this passage, John 20 through 23. Then Peter, turning about, seeth the disciple whom Jesus loved following, which also leaned on his breast at supper, and said, Lord, which is he that betrayeth thee? Peter, seeing him, saith to Jesus, Lord, what shall this man do? Jesus saith unto him, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Then the saying went abroad among the brethren, that the disciple should not die. Yet Jesus said not unto him, he shall not die, but if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? What this means, in my opinion, and anyone can argue it, I guess, but what this is saying is Jesus is telling you, me, and everybody else that our paths is with him, and it is nobody else's business. It's none of my business what Glenn's path is, or smoking babies, or hard to kill. We're all on our own different path, and this has been a beautiful night of a sharing and displaying of that, and the multitude of successes doing it all. Man, this has been awesome, and I have said many times before, there is more than one way to skin a cat, and look at all the examples of it. Damn. That being said, I kind of have a condensed version of what everybody before me has already taught me, because I've learned from so many of you brothers listening to you in the past and so on. And the reality is that this, to me, it comes down to a real simple thing. It is all contracts. The way I see it, every code, every statute, every regulation is an offer to contract. Everything out of a judge's mouth, a DA's mouth, a cop's mouth, even the janitor at City Hall is an offer to contract.
Hold that thought a second, Pops. I got interrupted. Yes. You interrupted everybody on the call, but I'm not doing it for that reason. I'm going to stop the recording and restart it. No, I don't have to. I got another hour. Never mind. Keep going. My bad.
Okay, okay, cool. No worries. So, that being said, I look at it like this. You have to know who you are as a player in the game. And that player is that you are the only real party in interest. We don't own the name. Most of us know this. Most of us that don't, read the backside of the Social Security card. It says right there on the backside of the card that they own it. That means that you're an agent for it. That being said, you know, when it comes to, and I saw some comments about some people's messages and some of the stuff that they were citing, some codes and statutes and all, I can appreciate the idea that that stuff may not apply. But the reality is this too. In my world, the way I see it, everything is ambiguous. Everything needs to be questioned, because anything and everything that goes unquestioned, unrebutted, or unobjected to is considered to be consented to and are true, which means that we need to question every word. which means that in order to be at the best level of asking questions, we need to have a very high level of knowledge, study, research, knowing a lot of these different so-called codes, statutes, regulations, and what have you, so you know how things are at least supposed to be. So that when you do ask the right questions, you ask the questions that lay out the playing field, the softball questions, let their answers lay it out. Then you hit them with the hardball questions. They can't change that playing field now. And the biggest one, as we all know, it's all contracts. Well, the biggest thing is we all know that every corporation is nothing more than a stack of paper with ink on it. Every bank, every Sears and Roebuck, every city, county, so on and so forth. That is supposed to be the principle for which you are having these so-called meeting of the minds. We heard about meeting of the minds earlier and saw a court case talking specifically about it. The reality of that is this. Nobody has ever spoken with any of us the way that I am speaking with you now and the others have spoken with you earlier this evening. Was that being said, then nobody can ever have the conversation with the piece of paper. What do you mean by the color green? What do you mean by the color purple? Whatever. Because until you can have that so-called meeting of the minds, you cannot have what is known as formation. And formation is the actual contract. It is not the piece of paper with ink on it. It is the fact that two or more people have come to an agreement as to what they mean by all the so-called terms and conditions. Green, purple, widget, whatever, salt. That being said, then obviously in law, you are allowed to have a conversation, an attempt to settle a matter honorably outside and independent of the court. The only time that the court is ever supposed to be involved is if there is a controversy. Well, if you're always asking the right questions and staying in honor, then there is no controversy to bring before the court. If you make a controversy such as cop says you're speeding. No, I wasn't. Okay, there you go. You just created controversy. You just gave the court jurisdiction, regardless of any of the other actions you might have done, such as claiming the name and so on and so forth. And I love it when people claim to be a so-called U.S. citizen. Oh, my God. Yeah, thank you for that. Please don't include me in your we, because I don't believe I've ever seen the evidence of such a thing called a U.S. citizen, much less that I am one. So that being said, the only one that can ever bring a claim against you is the real party in interest, the one with the first-hand knowledge of that meeting of the minds. That would be somebody known as the claimant. Now, I've heard people talk about some things fairly similar along the way. Some dude, a.k.a. Boris, talks about proof of claim. Well, the way I see it, he and I are asking for pretty much the same damn thing, because the only true person that can actually have proof of claim is the real party in interest, the one with the first-hand knowledge. The only one that could ever possibly have the true proof of claim is the one with the first-hand knowledge. That being said, again, I believe that we should all be learning as much as we can. I'm kind of at the tail end of my learning thing, so to speak. I'm 60 years old, allegedly, and due to some health concerns and all, I'm about done. I'm pretty comfortable with where I'm at. There's a few more things that I'd like to learn. And the reality is, again, good, better, best, the more you know, the better questions you can ask. So,
now.
What's that?
I ask you one now.
Yes, go for it. Absolutely.
When we spoke, when I was putting this call together,
Yes.
you had some incredible testimonies that I was hoping you were going to share.
Yes, I was just getting to that.
Okay, I just didn't know because we had a pretty a lively call, and I heard you getting all excited, and I'm thinking, boy, I don't want him to burn all those minutes.
No. Actually, absolutely. No. So to kind of get to it real quick and to put a little bit of an idea as to where some of my experience has come from. I started learning some of this stuff close to about 10 years ago, the so-called sovereign free man, so on, whatever, however you want to put it. And I was dealing with some legal issues at the time. And kind of in this order, because there's a couple of stories that I want to tell about something called the so-called state national passport. And I don't buy into the whole state national thing, but the stories that I have that go along with that passport, where you started off earlier, Daniel, are very interesting. So, that being said, I started realizing this about the claimant and who I was as a player in the game. So I'm in court one morning, and the DA comes to me and asks me if I'm willing to have a conversation about the case. So I say, yeah, sure. So we go out into the hallway, and this brother asked me if I'm willing to negotiate some kind of a plea deal. And I asked him, why would I do that? Has the claimant shown up yet so that I can have a chance to settle this matter honorably with him? And the DA says, well, I don't know how to answer that question. We don't do that around here. And so I asked him, well, who told you that? He said, oh, I don't know how to answer that question. So I asked him, well, then can I talk to the guy that does know how to answer that question? He says, well, I don't know how to answer that question. So I literally asked him this specific question. Then what the fuck am I doing talking to you, bro? He gets this serious deer in the headlights look, turns around, walks into the court. I go back in. Pretty soon the judge calls the case up. Judge says something to the fact that he asked me if I had read the so-called amended complaint. And I said, well, why would I do that? What does that have to do with me? Is the claimant here yet so I can have a chance to settle this matter honorably with them? He said, well, the DA has added a charge, and I need to know how you plead. So I asked him again, well, plead what to who? Again, is the claimant here so I can settle the matter honorably with them? And he says, I'm not going to play that with you. I'm going to go ahead and put in a not guilty plea for you. I said, oh, great. Does that mean you're assuming liability for that, Judge? That judge turned and ran out of the courtroom. I had never seen a judge run so fast in my life. And this is the judge that had actually put me back in a cage 3 or 4 times. It was the supervising judge of the courthouse. He comes back about an hour later and clears the courtroom. Then he calls the case back up. And as I'm walking back up to the podium, I asked this specific question. Was that a yes or a no? That judge bolted out of that courtroom even faster. There was flames coming off of his shoes. Olive Oil was there that day. She thought the judge actually had diarrhea or something. She thought he was sick. But there was a good friend there. He was thinking some of the same things, like, what the hell's going on here, bro? I've never seen a judge run out so fast. The second time he ran out, he tells the court clerk to set for another date in front of another judge. Well, one of the things that I'd kept in mind is several years prior to this, it was just a couple, maybe 3 or 4 at that point, friend, so to speak, a former prosecutor for the city of Long Beach here in California, had dropped a little gold nugget in the lap one day. And he told me that anything and everything that goes unquestioned, unrebutted, or unobjected to is considered to be consented to and are true. So I kept this to heart. And I also then started to realize that these judges, especially like in the so-called calendar courtrooms in a criminal courthouse, they always ask the defendant important questions 3 times. Well, I kind of figured when in Rome, do as the Romans do. 3's a charm, 3 strikes are out. Well, hey, let's try it. Well, I think that it might have been onto something because I do believe that had I been able to ask that judge one more time that question, it would have been whatever the answer I wanted it to be, which would have been yes, he was assuming liability. He would be putting up surety, which means that he would have to then explain to the DA how I wasn't guilty. Oh, snap. It's okay, though. It's all good because I had a little bit more learning experience to move on to. Because, like I said, that judge told the clerk to set for another date in front of another judge. That next date, I was really starting to feel my oats at that point and felt like asking something different and kind of throwing a different whole spin into the situation. And judge calls the case up, and I said, I'm here for that matter. And the judge asked him, well, are you such and such legal name? And I said, well, I'm led to believe there may have been a mistake. And the judge asked, well, what do you mean by a mistake? And I said, well, I'm led to believe that that name belongs to somebody called the Social Security Administration or the United States. And if that be true, I'm led to believe that if I'm just to assume that that name is mine, that I would be committing trespass to chattels. And if that be true, I'm led to believe that if I'm using a name that does not belong to me as personal identification purposes, that could be considered fraud, and I certainly don't believe I want to commit fraud right here in the courtroom. Judge kind of gets a little smile on his face and asks, well, what do you suggest we do? So I asked him, well, would it be okay if you call me friend of the court or peaceful inhabitant? The judge says, okay, Mr. Peaceful Inhabitant. And I stopped him right there and I said, whoa, wait a minute, brother. Where did that Mr. come from, bro? I believe it was just Peaceful Inhabitant. So the judge kind of smiles and turns to the DA, and he starts talking to the DA about how they'll have to just wait until Mr. Legal Name shows up because, well, Mr. Legal Name is the only one that could possibly answer their questions. And I'm standing there with a Cheshire cheesy eating grin on my face thinking, yeah, what, Judge? You expecting a sound or a piece of paper with ink on it to come waltzing through the door and actually speak to you as I am speaking with you now? I didn't say that. I was keeping my tongue, behaving myself. The judge turns back to me and he says, Peaceful Inhabitant, we need you to come back on such and such a date for another hearing. And I asked the judge, I said, hey, Judge, would it be all right if I come back on such and such a date so I can help settle this matter honorably with the claimant? The judge said, yeah, that'll be fine. Well, that next date, DA meet me in the hallway and says, we've dismissed the charges. You can go home. We don't need you here anymore. That brings me then to the next two little stories. During this time period, while I'm still finishing off the last legal issue, I'm still on probation for another legal issue. But I went ahead, per a brother that's been in this call most of the evening that I've seen, brother we know as Pastor of the Way. He and I have been friends for many years, and he told me about the so-called passport and how to fill it out and shared with me the so-called Copper Moonshine Stills website and all. And I watched the video for Yusufel talking about it, and I was pretty convinced that, hey, this was something we might really want to try. Well, then Pastor gets me on a call with 3 other truck driving buddies from back east. And all 3 of them have the same exact story about the passport. They all tell me that, hey, look, I'm a truck driver. I get tickets all the damn time. I'm usually getting one like once a month, once every other month. Just kind of how it is. Ever since I started handing over the passport, the same thing happens time and time again. It hasn't changed once since. And what happens is I'll hand over the passport. The cop will go back to the car. He'll come back a couple minutes later. He'll hand me back the passport and tell me to have a nice day and turn around and walk off. One brother did say one time he had a slightly different situation where the cop got to the back of the cab and then he stopped and turned around and asked the brother, do you happen to have any weapons on the vehicle? And the brother asked him, am I obligated to answer any of your questions? And the cop said no and turned around and walked away. Well, that convinced me right there. As soon as I was done with that phone call, I hung up. I got on the website, started pulling up the DS11 and looking at the website at Copper Moonshine Stills, filled that out, got it all taken care of, went down that very first Saturday. As soon as I got it all filled out, got myself an appointment. Lady there even did her best to convince me to change some of the way I had it filled out, and I told her, no, thank you kindly, I'd like to just keep it the way it is, if you don't mind. So she let me. Of course, how the fuck is she going to tell me how to do my shit as a public servant? And we'll get to that in a minute. But that being said, I fill it out. I get it all done. I sign it, do all the expedition of the processing. I pay for the overall or the overnight shipping to and from. I do this on a Saturday. Literally a week and a half later on Wednesday, I had the book in hand, and on that Saturday, I had the card in hand. That being said, I'm still on probation. One day, the probation officer wants to check the vehicle that I'm known to drive. And so we go out to the car, and he asks for the driver's license. I pull out the passport. I ask him this very specific question, again, being all contracts. I ask him, will this piece of plastic suffice? Because what I've just done is I didn't totally just reject his offer. I counter-offered with, instead of it being an ID or a driver's license, it was merely a piece of plastic. That being said, he had already been through this with me before, so he says, yes, the piece of plastic will suffice, before I even said the piece of plastic. He takes the card, hands it to the sheriff's deputy that's escorting us, and he starts to check the vehicle. As she calls in the number. All of a sudden, and this is just a few seconds later, she gets this wild-eyed, what the fuck kind of look on her face. And she tells the probation officer, who, like I said, has just now started to check the car. She tells him to come over and listen to this. He goes over there, and he puts his ear down to that little microphone thing that they got on the shoulder there, that she has on her shoulder. And as soon as there's no more sound coming out, and she even turned this volume down, it seemed like, they both give me a look of, what the fuck? He takes the passport. He takes the passport from her. He walks over to me. He hands me the passport, and he says these exact words. Nice separation from the name and the driver's license. I suggest you get a driver's license. And I asked him right then immediately, am I obligated to do such a thing? And he said no, and turned around and walked away. Now, the gist of this whole thing is this. The reason why they were checking the cars, they were looking for probation violations. They were looking for a reason to chuck me back in a cage. Driving, so to speak, under their terms, without a license is a probation violation. They had their probation violation in hand, but there was something that came up on that radio that made them have that look of what the fuck and not arrest me for a probation violation. Then, and we're literally getting close to almost a year ago, there was a situation that arose last year, December, or a year ago, December in 2022, I had a little surgery. I had a piece of fat taken out of the left foot. It was rather painful. In January, I go back to the doctor to have the stitches removed. It's cold. I have my heavy jacket on. I conceal carry all the time, regardless of the passport or not. I just have my own reasons. And I'll get to that just in a second here. kind of going back to something that was talked about earlier. When they were getting ready to take the last stitch out, I passed out. I've actually had a lot of surgeries. I'm a pretty tough alpha male dude. I've never passed out having stitches taken out of this body. I had a pretty severe pass out. It was something called the vasosyncope, where enough blood rushes out of the brain to where you actually go into tremors. It looks very much like a seizure. The doctor actually thought that I was having a seizure, so the doctor calls the paramedics. Paramedics show up, ask for ID. I hand them the passport, yada, yada, yada. They pull the jacket back to check the breathing and the heart, and the gun's there. Nobody freaks out. Nobody says anything. They've already called in the number to first responders and all this. So they take me out in a gurney. They're going to take me over to the hospital, which is literally right across the parking lot. It's in a medical complex where the offices are one side, the hospital's on the other. The paramedics tell me I didn't have a seizure. I just had this vasosyncope. I'm okay. The wife has been called. She's on her way. I don't even have to go into the hospital. I can just simply stay on the gurney until she shows up, go home. But because of the gun, the cops have been called, and here in California, for anybody that doesn't know, to carry a concealed weapon without a so-called permit is a misdemeanor, but it is a pretty major misdemeanor because that's only on the first offense. If yours is a second offense, it's a felony. So we get to the hospital. They pull me out of the ambulance. I'm sitting on the gurney. Doctor comes out from ER. We go through this little thing of he wants to check me out. I don't want to go in. He wants me to leave the gun with the cops. I don't want to do that. Yada, yada, yada. I convince him I'm going to wait there on the gurney until the wife shows up. The whole time there's 3 cops standing right there in complete plain view of a Glock 29 and a Galco leather holster, a Jackass maroon. I'm giving you details for anybody that actually thinks that I might be bullshit, and go check this shit out. You'll know that I'm speaking of truth, exactly what I'm saying. These are legit items, and I have them. These cops are in complete view of a potential crime being committed had they not had a reason and or been told to stand down. Prior to this, I had been doing my best to actually get pulled over, get a ticket, or at least attempt to, so I could test that passport. Up to and including doing 100 miles an hour down the freeway one night. Highway Patrol comes up on me, flashes his lights. I slow to 85, which is still way over the so-called speed limit. We get to the next freeway. He jumps off into the next freeway and just drives away. I could not, even up to and including about a year ago, Olive Oil and I went to Vegas. I was doing about 110, 105 a majority of the way, and could even see the Highway Patrol plane sitting off about a half mile off the freeway, pacing me. I can't get pulled over right now, knock on wood, count my blessings. But that being said, let's get back to something that was talked about earlier, and perspective.
Wrap it up, though.
One of the biggest things here. What's that, brother?
Yeah, I need to wrap it up because it's over. Over the 5 minutes.
I'm going to make this one fast, and I'll be done. If I'm done before the time is up, it's good. Fine, I'll mute out, and we can move on. That being said,
a minute ago.
no, okay. Well, I'll make this really fast.
Go ahead.
That is this. Anybody that applies for a job working for GovCo in any shape, nature, or form, their basic title is public servant. If they are the servant, that means that we are the master. We are kings and queens. It is good to be the king, because never in the history of mankind has the servants ever written the rules for the king. Never, ever, ever in the history of mankind has the king ever had to ask permission of the servants to do anything. The king can write different rules for each and every servant. And why? Because it's good to be the king. The king can even write a separate set of rules for the queen. And why? Because it's good to be the king. And if there's no king, the queen gets that job, and she can write the rules for the court jester and everybody else. Because it's good to be the king or the queen or whoever you are in line if there's nobody above you. And the way I see it, I look above me, and I do not see the soles of the feet of another man or woman. There is God, there is me, and that is it. Everyone else is on a level playing field, except for the people that want to be my servant, and I call them a public servant, a.k.a. GovCo agents. I relinquish the mic. I love y'all. It's been an awesome evening.
You did good, man. I know it's all difficult to get into that habit of being on a time limit. A little bit more grace here than they do have in the halls of Congress. So I'm so thankful for your testimony.